If you're saying we're at war with the Chinese Communist Party and already at war with them, what facts do you bring for that, other than the fact you're just another crazy person over at the war room screaming into the microphone, ma'am?
They declared war on the U.S. So if you take a look at what's in the publications in China Daily or Global Times from at least 2019, they talk about a people's war. That is Chinese Communist Party language for being at war, and those are official publications. You don't write that by accident. And I think one of the things.
What do you mean official? They're just one's a tabloid, the other's a newspaper. What do you mean official publications?
You don't publish something like that in China Daily or Global Times and keep your job or your head if the if the regime doesn't like it. And the term "people's war"
they're like Pravda used to be with the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and I think what would be helpful is taking a look at the word war. Right? Their version of war is very different than our version of war. It's much more comprehensive. And we have had, I mean, you in the U.S., so part of George Washington's farewell address was the description of the U.S. as a detached and distant land, which gave room to the isolationists to say, we have an option to be isolated from the rest of the world. It's our decision whether or not to get engaged in these foreign conflicts or not. And you've got compliant Canada on one side and Mexico that can be beaten down on the other. But you are effectively a strategic island. What the Chinese Communist Party has very specifically set out to do is erase the distance between the Chinese Communist Party ability to reach into the U.S. and that island. So what you see in terms of warfare, and Colonel Newsham has written about this extensively in his book, are things like chemical warfare with the use of fentanyl. It's erased distance. They're hitting the U.S. now. Colonel Newsham will talk about it more. Economic warfare, the way that it's used the WTO, bribery, coercion to get into the U.S. economy and destroy it from the inside. Biological warfare, where they blocked internal flights from Wuhan but pushed external flights, including into the U.S. It specifically pushed for a very long time to keep exporting people who they knew a percentage of whom would likely be able to carry disease into the U.S. So if you look across a whole range of the spectrum of warfare, you'll see that the attacks happening within the U.S., and this isn't, don't forget, cyber, obviously the fifth columnists, and in terms of people who are taking money from the Chinese, they've declared war, but they're also waging a war through erasing that distance that buffered the U.S. for centuries. So now it's a rearguard action on the part of the U.S. This is what you talk about often on the War Room. The fight isn't necessarily just Taiwan. The fight is cleaning up what's here now. Well, who's walking across the border? We talked here the other day. We talked about Chinese arriving in the United States in the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas without a visa, illegally taking boats to Guam and wandering around the military bases. Look at the land purchases in strategic locations. So this is across the board. It would be very hard to make an economic justification for the activities that the Chinese Communist Party is doing in the United States if it wasn't part of a strategic plan to erode the United States from the inside, a sort of entropic warfare, right, where you degrade it and weaken it to get to the point where, you know, you'll hear the term win without fighting, but the actual translation is get the other side to submit without fighting. And submission is a permanent state. Winning is one-off. You beat the Japanese, you sign a piece of paper, you help Japan rebuild. You get the other side to submit, that is permanent. You are in a permanent state of submission. That's a very different definition of winning. So I would argue that the West may not think it's at war with China. The Chinese Communist Party organs have said they are.